President Trump is doubling down on his comments, railing against the Somali community here, the largest in the U.S.
The Somalians should be out of here. They've destroyed our country.
Minneapolis City Councilman Jamal Osman was born in Somalia.
How did it hit you when you heard what the president had to say?
You know, the saddest part for me was just trying to answer my daughters and saying that why are we being singled out?
I won't answer any more questions.
Okay. Can you put handcuffs on him, please?
While Border Patrol tonight is also launching a crackdown on illegal immigration in New Orleans, administration officials say ICE in Minneapolis is not targeting the Somali community, but just enforcing deportation orders already issued by.
Did you hear that father ask his daughters why they're being singled out? Because every single one of us watching needs to sit with the weight of that question, needs to hold it close and understand that what we just witnessed is not merely political theater, but the architecture of state-sponsored dehumanization, crystallizing before our eyes in real time. Trump literally called Somali immigrants and Congresswoman Ilhan Omar garbage, who should go back to where they came from, and then hours later, ICE operations specifically targeting undocumented Somali immigrants in Minneapolis and St. Paul were launched, which reveals the sinister machinery at work here, where presidential rhetoric becomes instantaneous enforcement policy. And this isn't coincidence, folks. This is fascism wearing the costume of law and order. The administration claims they're just enforcing deportation orders already issued by judges, as if proceduralism somehow sanitizes the grotesque racial animus driving this entire operation. But let's be abundantly clear about what's happening, because a Minneapolis City Council member who is himself a Somali refugee claims immigration enforcement authorities are targeting all people of Somali descent, even U.S. citizens, which means the veneer of legality is cracking and exposing the ethno-nationalist project underneath. We need to understand the genealogy of this moment, because Trump has weaponized a tragedy that had nothing to do with Somalia, the shooting involving an Afghan national, even though the alleged shooter is an Afghan who had nothing to do with Somalia, yet he's using it as justification to unleash what amounts to ethnic cleansing operations against an entire community, and this is textbook authoritarian scapegoating, pulled straight from the fascist playbook where a leader designates an outgroup as simultaneously threatening and inferior, then mobilizes state violence against them. Historical parallels are screaming at us because we've seen this before in every descent into authoritarianism, from the pogroms targeting Jewish communities in early 20th century Europe, to Japanese internment camps in America, to the Rwandan genocide where radio broadcasts dehumanized Tutsis as cockroaches, and now we have a president of the United States calling Somali migrants garbage during a cabinet meeting, which is language designed to strip human beings of their humanity and make violence against them feel justified. Trump intensified his attacks on Somalis on social media after Christopher Rufo, a conservative activist, published unsubstantiated allegations, citing unnamed sources that money stolen from Minnesota programs has gone to Al-Shabaab, which shows how conspiracy theories manufactured by right-wing operatives become pretext for state repression. And this is the information warfare component of modern fascism, where propaganda and policy enforcement become indistinguishable. The councilman's question about explaining to his daughters why they're being singled out should haunt every single American who claims to value justice, because Minnesota is home to the largest Somali community in the United States, with more than 61,000 persons of reported Somali ancestry. Since the early 1990s, Somalis have consistently arrived as refugees from civil war, and many found Minnesota appealing because of available social services and welfare programs that helped them resettle, which means this community came here through legal humanitarian channels, seeking safety and built lives and contributed economically and culturally for 3 decades. Let's talk about what law and order actually means in this context, because conservatives love to hide behind that phrase as if neutrality can somehow launder racism, but when you have an intensive immigration enforcement operation, primarily targeting hundreds of undocumented Somali immigrants with roughly 100 officers and agents from around the country brought into the operation, this is not routine enforcement. This is a military-style occupation, targeting one ethnic community, and the deployment of what they're calling strike teams comprising ICE officers and other federal officials reveals the martial character of this operation. The administration's defense that they're simply executing existing deportation orders is legalistic cover for targeted harassment, because as scholars of immigration enforcement have documented for years, enforcement is always discretionary, and when you choose to concentrate resources on one ethnic community in one geographic area, that's called racial profiling, that's called discrimination, that's called using state power to terrorize vulnerable populations, And we cannot ignore the broader context here where Trump claimed immigrants from Somalia are completely taking over the once great state of Minnesota, while using a slur for intellectually disabled people to attack Governor Tim Walz, which shows the president is trafficking in replacement theory rhetoric, the same ideology that motivated mass shooters in El Paso and Buffalo and Christchurch. The moral depravity deepens when you consider that Minneapolis City Council member Jamal Osman called the president racist, xenophobic, Islamophobic, and said America has a history of fighting and stopping those kind of individuals who continue to divide people and divide communities, which places Trump in the lineage of demagogues who have weaponized bigotry throughout American history, from the Know Nothing Party to the White Citizens Councils to the modern MAGA movement. Local officials are standing firm because Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey said, "We love you and we stand with you," to the Somali community, and confirmed Minneapolis police would not participate in immigration enforcement operations, and St. Paul Mayor Melvin Carter said, "The last thing we need is federal agents coming in town to create chaos," which demonstrates that sanctuary policies are not lawlessness, but rather local governments choosing humanity over cruelty, choosing community safety over federal overreach. The fact that Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara said his officers will protect demonstrators' First Amendment rights and asked that demonstrations remain nonviolent shows local law enforcement understands that mass deportation operations destabilize communities and make everyone less safe by destroying trust between immigrants and police. Now let's examine the ideological project animating this crackdown, because Trump's rhetoric about Somalia being a place that stinks and has no laws, no water, no military, no nothing, reveals the white supremacist worldview where entire nations and peoples are deemed inferior and unworthy. And this connects to his broader agenda because Trump wrote he would permanently pause migration from all third world countries and remove anyone who is not a net asset to the United States, which is eugenics language. It's social Darwinism. It's the commodification of human life, where people are only valuable insofar as they contribute to American economic extraction. This is neoliberal capitalism, fused with ethno-nationalism, where migrants are simultaneously exploited for their labor and vilified as threats, and when they're no longer useful, or when they demand rights and dignity, they're discarded through deportation. And this is how racial capitalism has always functioned, from slavery to Jim Crow to our current carceral regime. The administration's claim that Trump said most foreign-born U.S. residents are on welfare, from failed nations or from prisons, mental institutions, gangs, or drug cartels, is demonstrably false, as a study by economists found immigrants are 60% less likely to be incarcerated than people born in the U.S., and immigrants have been imprisoned at lower rates for 150 years, which proves this entire narrative is built on lies, on manufactured fear, on weaponized xenophobia. The surveillance state implications are terrifying because U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Director announced a full-scale, rigorous re-examination of every green card for every alien from every country of concern, and USCIS halted all asylum decisions until they can ensure that every person is vetted and screened to the maximum degree possible, which means legal immigrants who went through years of background checks, who built lives here, who are American in every meaningful sense, are now subject to retroactive persecution. This is the denaturalization agenda, where citizenship itself becomes conditional and revocable based on whether one are deemed sufficiently loyal to the regime, and scholars of authoritarianism recognize this as a hallmark of fascist governance, where rights are stripped from targeted populations incrementally through administrative mechanisms. And when Trump said the U.S. will re-examine all green cards issued to people from 19 countries of concern, he's creating a two-tiered system of citizenship where people from certain nations, predominantly Muslim-majority countries, predominantly black and brown nations, are permanently suspect, permanently vulnerable to having their status revoked. What we're witnessing is not just immigration enforcement, but the construction of a police state where a 2024 state law in Louisiana, designed to bar anyone from getting within 25 feet of a law enforcement officer during an active operation, was cited by police to try to keep a bystander with a camera away, which shows how states are criminalizing documentation and transparency around ICE operations, and this is about controlling the narrative about preventing Americans from seeing the violence being done in their name. The economic violence is equally devastating, because America's foreign-born workers account for nearly 31 million jobs according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and mass deportations would be economically catastrophic. But this isn't really about economics, it's about power. It's about maintaining racial hierarchy. It's about Trump and his movement needing an enemy to consolidate their base, and Somali Muslims make perfect targets because they're visible, because they're organized, because they've achieved political representation through leaders like Ilhan Omar. The resistance we're seeing matters immensely because many Somali Americans in Minnesota say they've felt a growing sense of uneasiness after Trump's continued rhetoric against Somalis, which has sparked frustration and fear. But also, Minneapolis City Council member Jamal Osman said his community has lived through fear in the past, and we are not going to let that divide us, which demonstrates the resilience of communities who survived civil war, who built new lives, who will not be intimidated by a president's bigotry. Recent polling shows the terrain is contested because 70% of voters, including a majority of Republicans, oppose ICE restraining children with zip ties during raids, and majorities oppose ICE roughly throwing protesters on the ground and conducting deportation raids in the middle of the night, which means Trump is overreaching and creating the conditions for a backlash, but only if we organize, only if we fight back, only if we refuse to normalize this. The path forward requires us to name this for what it is, which is ethnic targeting, which is state-sponsored violence, which is the leading edge of fascism, and we must build solidarity between immigrant communities and broader progressive movements, because St. Paul Mayor Melvin Carter condemned the administration's approach as racist and xenophobic, arguing that it threatens American citizens and undermines due process. And this is the coalition we need: elected officials, activists, faith communities, labor unions, all standing together to protect our neighbors. We need to flood city council meetings and state legislatures, demanding sanctuary policies, demanding that local officials refuse cooperation with ICE, demanding legal defense funds for targeted communities, and we need to make it politically toxic for Democrats to capitulate, because progressive activists feel that Democratic leaders are not standing up for immigrants as strongly as they should be, and this is the moment to push our representatives to be courageous, to choose justice over political calculation. The Somali community in Minneapolis represents everything beautiful about America's potential. They are entrepreneurs and fathers and mothers and students. They benefit both the cultures and the economic resilience of the city. And when Trump attacks them, he attacks all of us. He attacks the very possibility of a multiracial democracy. And our response must be unequivocal. We stand with Somali immigrants. We will not allow this administration to disappear, people. We will bear witness, we will resist, and we will win, because history bends toward justice, but only when we bend it through collective struggle, through moral courage, through refusing to look away when fascism shows its face.